Everyone knows you lift weights to build muscle, but is there more to it? How do we actually train to get the most gains for the times we spend in the gym? Your body is in a continuous process breaking down and synthesizing proteins, and proteins, amino acids, are the main building blocks of muscle. When your body is adding more protein than it is removing from your muscles, you have a positive net protein balance, and hypertrophy can occur, increasing the size of the muscles. Protein intake and resistance training are the two main factors that can increase muscle protein synthesis. Protein intake is the simplest because it just comes down to eating enough protein. If you're consistently eating more than 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight, you should be fine. Most people tend to aim for 1 gram per pound just to be sure they're not leaving any gains on the table, and also because 1 is a nice round number. If you want to be a bit more precise, you should aim to spread this protein in 3 to 4 equal amounts throughout the day. So if you weigh 150 pounds, you'd ideally want to get 50 grams per meal for breakfast, lunch and dinner. Aside from making sure the protein is high enough, you'll probably also want to make sure you're in a slight calorie surplus, burning fewer calories than you're consuming, to make sure that your body has the excess energy it needs to build new muscle. Track your weight every day and average at the end of the week. If the weekly average is increasing by 0.025 to 0.05%, then you can be confident that you're in a bit of a surplus, and so hopefully will build a lot of muscle and not a lot of fat, if you're also doing resistance training, which is the second part of the key to muscle protein synthesis. Resistance training is any training that is specifically designed to increase muscular strength, endurance, or in our case, size. For hypertrophy, our training should be focused on sending signals to the muscles that they need to get bigger. The keys to effective hypertrophy are mechanical tension and metabolic stress. We used to think that muscle damage was also vital, however, it appears that it is not. Mechanical tension is the force generated by our muscles contracting against an opposing force, and can be thought of as an outside-in stress, as the external force is what's creating the tension on the muscle. Metabolic stress is the inside-out stress, created by breaking down metabolites inside the muscle, leading to the pump sensation. Before looking at how to build our resistance training plan, we need to know two principles for hypertrophy that will be foundational in how we build our program. The first is overload. This is the principle that for hypertrophy to occur, we need to be giving a training stress that our muscles are not accustomed to. This doesn't mean that we need to be doing random or completely unique workouts every week, but essentially means that the workout should not be easy. As we adapt to the volume that we are lifting, we need to progressively overload by increasing the sets, reps, and weights that we use. This progression ensures that we are always overloading the muscles and signaling for hypertrophy. The second is specificity. This is the principle that the way the body responds is specific to the demands of the activity, meaning that there are better ways to optimally train for hypertrophy versus strength, power, or endurance. With these two principles in mind, let's examine what makes a resistance training plan good from a hypertrophy perspective. There are 6 acute training variables that studies look at for optimizing hypertrophy. Muscle action refers to the way that the muscle moves, whether concentric, the muscle is shortening in length, eccentric, the muscle is lengthening, or isometric, the muscle is contracting but not moving. For hypertrophy, we want movements with a concentric and eccentric action, so movements where the weight moves up and down or where the muscle is both flexion and extension. Isometric holds don't appear to be a primary cause of hypertrophy, but can be important in providing a secondary stabilizing role. A key thing to consider here is that generally we want to travel through the whole concentric and eccentric contraction. That means we go from a peak contraction, where the muscle is squeezing and cannot flex anymore, to a full stretch, where the muscle is at its full length and cannot extend anymore. The deep stretch in many cases is the most important part of the exercise, as it seems to provide the greatest stimulus to grow. However, it is also the hardest to do, and so many people will avoid doing a full range of motion in order to lift heavier weights. This is a bad idea. Getting a full range of motion in exercises is not only extremely beneficial to hypertrophy, but also to mobility and injury prevention. Load and volume are the two factors that you'll be measuring throughout your training program, increasing them to ensure that you are progressively overloading the muscle. The load is the weight that is used in a set, and the volume is the amount of total work done in a set, calculated by multiplying the sets by the reps and the weight. Throughout an accumulation period, the volume should be increasing from week to week, whether from adding more repetitions or weights, or by adding more sets. Ideally, for hypertrophy, you'll be hitting repetitions between 5 and 30 for each exercise, with some exercises benefiting from different rep ranges. Compound lifts, for example a deadlift, require the use of a huge amount of the muscles in the body, and so are generally best kept to low rep ranges like 5 to 10, while isolation exercises that target smaller muscles, for example a forearm curl, can be harder to isolate with high loads where other muscles can compensate, and so may be best to train at higher rep ranges like 20 to 30. Pick the rep range that you'll be working in for each exercise, and then use a load so that you start the training block ending each set with around 3 reps in reserve, meaning that the weight you start with should be such that if you pushed yourself to your absolute limit, you'd only be able to get 3 more reps out before you physically could not do another. As each training session takes place, adding at either 1 or 2 reps if you're within the rep range, or increment the weight so that the session gets harder and you approach failure. This addition of reps or load is how we get progressive overload, giving the muscles the stimulus they need to grow. The number of sets should usually start quite low for each exercise and increase if you are able to recover by the next session. If the number of sets gets too high, you can fall into the trap of doing junk volume, training that does not lead to any increase in your hypertrophy and that can actually lead to a decrease. If you're training so much that you can't recover for the next session, or if you're doing more than 12 sets for a given muscle in a day, or more than 30 sets total, it's likely you're doing junk volume and should lower the amount of sets. As an example, we could start our training block doing chest press with 5 to 10 reps using 60 kilograms. If 3 reps in reserve gets us 8 reps, then the next week we can increase the reps to 9, and next to 10. Now we've reached the top of the rep range, and so increment the weight to 65 kilograms. We complete 10 reps with 65 and move to 70. Now we can only manage 7 reps, and so repeat the process incrementing the reps until we reach the top of the range, where we once again increase the weight. Repetition velocity is the speed at which you complete each rep. For example, a 1 to 1 to 1 would mean 1 second concentric, 1 second hold at peak contraction, and 1 second eccentric. The so-called gold standard from many studies is 2 to 1 to 4, as this theoretically maximizes the time and attention for the muscle. Significantly slower cadences, like 10 to 1 to 5, resulted in measurably less strength gains, and so going too slow should be avoided. Going too fast not only lowers the time and attention, but also increases the risk of injury, as you move the weight in an uncontrolled fashion. The ideal to strive for is seemingly 2 to 1 to 2 to 2 to 1 to 4. Exercise selection and order refers to what kind of movements you perform and where in the workout you perform them. Generally, the research finds that multi-joint, otherwise known as compound exercises, provide greater strength and hypertrophy stimulus to much larger muscle groups. But for hypertrophy, we probably also want some single joint or isolation exercises as well, to be able to target specific muscles. The general advice is to perform multi-joint exercises first in the workout, as you tend to have a lot less fatigue and so a lower chance of injury, and are also able to provide far more force than if you did them later, meaning that you're able to maximize the total amount of resistance lifted in a single session. Rest periods are the amount of time that you rest between sets. Broad advice tends to be that rests for 1 to 2 minutes between sets are ideal for hypertrophy. However, as different muscles recover at different rates, and the amount of systemic fatigue accrued is different for different exercises, the best rule of thumb is that you're good to do another set once 1. Your target muscles have recovered enough to do the minimum number of reps for the range you're working in. 2. Your nervous system has recovered enough to continue working. 3. Your cardiorespiratory system has recovered enough to continue, that means you aren't out of breath. And 4. Synergist muscles have recovered enough to continue the reps needed. 2 to 3 days of training can be good for beginners who are not used to going to the gym, and can allow them to make some initial gains while not overdoing it with fatigue. For ideal results, you usually want between 4 to 6 days per week doing resistance training, training each muscle group at least twice per week. Aside from these factors, the most important variable for making any progress is consistency. Hypertrophy takes a long time to occur, with a 2018 systematic review finding that for the first few sessions of training, almost all of the muscle response is focused on repair and remodeling of the muscle and not on hypertrophy. True hypertrophy didn't occur until around 3 weeks of consistent training, and was only consistently measured after 18 sessions of resistance training. Size increases before this were attributable to swelling from muscle damage, but this did not lead to actual hypertrophy, and so once repaired, the muscle went back to its original size. If you're not being consistent enough to go for many weeks on end, you will probably never get proper hypertrophic gains. Most experts recommend hypertrophic training for a bulk where you're in a calorie surplus to be consistent for a minimum of 12 weeks, so that you have enough time to cause real adaptations to occur.
It's over now.
So there you have it. Keys to building muscle come down to optimizing diet by eating enough protein and being in a light calorie surplus, and optimizing resistance training by taking muscles through a full range of motion, progressively overloading the muscles by increasing load and volume in exercises over time, having controlled repetition velocity around 2 to 1 to 4, generally prioritizing compound exercises before isolation, resting until target muscle, nervous system, cardiorespiratory system, and synergist muscles have recovered, and training each muscle group at least 2 times per week.